Hello and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. And I'm going to do a prologue analysis for the Bonehunters. But this video is very much focused on just the first 6 paragraphs of the second narrative sequence in the prologue to the Bonehunters. And I wanted to look specifically at what Erikson is doing with the language here and how it all interrelates with theme, with setting up narrative development and what I would call plot, and how everything is sort of tied together in sequences of building images and symbols, themes, tone, style, how it's all interrelated in terms of the prose and his word choice, what is going on in this, and how it sets up the sequence. So this will not have spoilers for the Bonehunters. It's more a sort of just an analysis of the writing. 100 or so years ago, lightning had struck the huge Guldina tree, the white fire driving like a spear down its heartwood and splitting wide the ancient trunk. That opening sentence, let's have a look at it. 100 or so years ago. So setting the scene. This is what we talk about in terms of, world building, scene setting. It gives us a time period. It gives us a sense of time. 100 or so years ago. So we know that the event that we're about to witness, that's about to be referenced in this paragraph or sentence, happened a while ago. Lightning had struck the huge Guldinha tree. So lightning had struck the huge tree. We get a sense of destruction, natural destruction, a sense of cognitive dissonance, because this is not a normal name for a tree as far as I'm aware. It's a fantasy tree. So 100 or so years ago, lightning had hit this tree. We get the literal image of a big tree, because it's huge, being struck by lightning. We've all seen blasted lightning trees. The white fire driving like a spear down its heartwood and splitting wide the ancient trunk. So white fire, obviously a poetic description of what lightning is. It gives us that sense of brilliance, but it also gives us that sense of destruction, because it is driving like a spear. It is being wounded. This is violent down its heartwood. And so the spear striking heartwood, the spear striking heart, this is violent. So we get particularly images like Zeus hurling the thunderbolts down, or Thor, wielding thunderbolts. This idea of lightning being a spear and striking the heartwood, going to the core of something and splitting wide the ancient trunk. So again, hundreds of years ago, ties into ancient trunk. We know it's a huge tree and splitting wide. So we get a sense of this being big, enormous, the sense of scale, and white fire, lightning, spear, violent, destructive act that is a force of nature, but it is destructive. It's violent. It is something that is not nice. The blackened scorch marks had long since bleached away as the desert sun burned its unceasing light upon the worm-riven wood. So we've gone from a natural destruction in some respects of this tree to the blackened scorch marks. So even though this happened 100 years ago, this was such a violent act, tying in with the idea of white fire. So lightning as white fire led to blackened scorch marks. So reinforcing that image of fire had long since bleached away. So this actually ties into white fire bleached away. So we're actually seeing how the initial images are being supported in the next line by things that deliberately tie into them to reinforce them, to carry on with that same sequence. As the desert sun burned its unceasing light. So again, lightning, fire, and now we have desert sun, burned, and light. Although these are describing two completely different things, we're seeing how they are in the same sort of style, the same area, the same arena. These are supportive images that build on one another. Fire, scorch marks, burning, lightning, light, white fire, everything here is building and supporting on itself, as well as emphasizing bleached away over time. So it's referencing had long since bleached away 100 or so years ago. So again, it's emphasizing that time period, this passage of time that we got at the very, very opening, and we see how that is being supported. The worm riven wood. So worm riven ties into, in some ways, the splitting wide, the spear into the heartwood that is breaking it apart. Worm riven. So it is full of these wormholes, but riven is again breaking apart. Worms in trees, obviously a natural thing like lightning, but it's a slightly different form of destruction. So that's actually a little thing about animals, corruption, decay, decomposition, being tied in here. But again, because it fits with all of the other things, we're not seeing this as a contradiction. We're not seeing it as a sudden juxtaposition. We're seeing it as a continuation of the same imagery. Swaths of bark had peeled back and now lay heaped over the bared roots that were wrapped about the hill summit like a vast net. So the swaths of bark. So we can imagine that we've been told that this is a tree that has been blasted, and now we're told that the swaths of bark had peeled back. So again, emphasizing destruction, and lay heaped. It's not neat, it's sprawling. So again, that sense of natural rather than ordered and very logical. It's a natural chaos to this over the bared roots. So this emphasizes in a couple of different ways some of the stuff that we're talking about here, because bared roots, why are they bare? First of all, we know that the roots of trees, some of them show above the ground. But because this happened so long ago, we get a sense that there's been some erosion that has exposed the roots that are typically below ground. So there's that subtle implication of passage of time through the erosion of the soil. We also have bared roots because we've been told that the bark has peeled back. So the roots themselves are no longer protected by the bark. So that fits with what happened in the previous things. And they are wrapped about the hill summit like a vast net. So suddenly we have a geographical position for this tree. We knew it was a tree, and now we know it is at the top of a hill. It is on a hill summit. And these bits of bark are scattered all along the bottom. So there's a sense of litter, a sense of rubbish, a sense of chaos. But the roots themselves are like a vast net. Now, obviously, nice poetic description of how we think of roots, that the tendrils all hanging down and going down into the soil. We can think of that as a net. It's a fairly evocative description. But interestingly, it now suggests capture, something being contained. The mound, misshapen where once it had been circular, commanded the entire basin. So again, the first paragraph opened with a time period and then ended with a geographical location about a hill. The second paragraph focuses on that hill. So it is continuing the image from the start and developing it further. The mound commanded the entire basin. So now we have a further exploration of the geographical area. It is a basin, and there's this mound in the middle of it that is commanding. It is prominent. So it is emphasizing the importance of this mound. Misshapen where once it had been circular. Now, the idea of a circular mound in nature seems slightly unnatural. Circular is a very definitive shape. Misshapen suggests erosion. So we're getting a suggestion in misshapen where once it had been circular, that this is a man-made mound. Just a suggestion, mind, it's not confirmed, but it had been man-made, but over time it has been eroded. And again, we're getting that from the sense of the passage of time that was hinted at in the first paragraph, that things have bleached over time, that the bark had peeled back over time, that the roots had been bared over time. So again, emphasizing the passage of time, emphasizing the natural progression of time, and connecting the past to the present. It stood alone, an island profoundly deliberate in the midst of a haphazard, random landscape. So this builds on that idea where the mound that had once been circular is now misshapen. We're seeing that it stood alone as an island, emphasizing it commanding this basin, deliberate in the midst of a haphazard random landscape. So the rest of the landscape is very natural, and this appears in some ways unnatural, which, if it is unnatural, it is perhaps man-made, artificial, which is the thing that was suggested by it had originally been circular and now no longer is. It's become misshapen. So we can see how, again, this is developing the image further, building on what went before, but constantly linking it back to these concepts, the subtext that is running through all of this. The haphazard random landscape. Beneath the jumbled boulders, sandy earth, and snaking dead roots, the capstone that had once protected a slabbed walled burial chamber had cracked, collapsing to swallow the space beneath, and in so doing, settling an immense weight upon the body interred within. And we've now moved from relatively short sentences to a much longer sentence. So we're getting a lot of information fed in here to conclude this paragraph. Beneath the jumbled boulders. So jumbled boulders tying into haphazard random landscape, tying back into the heaped bark, swathes of bark lying over the mound, and the fact that the mound is misshapen. All of those images being about chaos, disorder. Sandy earth and snaking dead roots. So the roots are like a vast net. They are also snaking. Snaking, not typically a positive image. So there's a certain negativity coming in here, something critical, something dangerous being suggested. But also, the snaking dead roots. Again, something that is an apt description, but it carries that subtext, it carries that connotation of something else. The capstone that had once protected a slabbed walled burial chamber had cracked. So now we're getting, why is this mound circular? It was a burial chamber and a mound had built up surrounding it. So our suspicion that it was man-made, that it was artificial, is confirmed. That's why this thing stands out. That's why it's a mound. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the sort of the megalithic tombs that we find in Ireland and in the UK and in France. But these strange mounds that when you scrape away the earth and the grass that's built up over them over time, suddenly you realize there's a burial chamber under there, and they happen a lot in areas that have these long histories of civilized occupation. But this is again emphasizing the ancient nature of something, that a burial chamber that has been there for so long that its capstone had cracked. Now, if you think these are big stones, these are big, heavy stones. So to crack, we're talking about destruction over time. And think back to that opening paragraph. Lightning had struck the huge tree. It was over 100 years since that had happened. But we had the lightning like a spear driving into the heartwood. We have all of this idea of destruction, erosion, the passage of time. And now we have it confirmed. The capstone that had once protected a slab-walled burial chamber had cracked, collapsing to swallow the space beneath. So the collapsing down, why is it no longer circular? Because of the passage of time, things have moved over time. So it supports that, but swallowing the space beneath, not just collapsing, but consuming, eating, again, a destructive act, but now tied into an element of personification, an element that is about this consumption, devouring, eating, and in so doing, settling an immense weight upon the body interred within. So we get the idea of the huge tree, this big mound, and it is settling an immense weight. So again, all of these things agree through the text. They are agreeing with each other. They are building on each other. But now the emphasis is shifting from this was about a tree on a hill. The hill is actually a burial mound. And what is in the center of a burial mound? A body interred within. And we have the roots were like a vast net, the snaking dead roots, an emphasis on the dead, necro, that there's an element of foreboding creeping in here. So a vast net, containment, snaking, foreboding and dangerous. And the idea that the net contains the burial of this thing interred within, the weight pressing down on it, seems very immediate. The tremor of footfalls reaching down to that body were a rare enough occurrence, perhaps a handful of times over the past countless millennia, that the long slumbering soul was stirred into wakefulness, then intense awareness upon the sensation of not one set of feet, but a dozen, ascending the steep, rough slopes and assembling at last around the shattered tree. So we went from the first paragraph, multiple sentences, the second paragraph, one sentence, and then a long sentence, to now a paragraph made of an entire single sentence. So we can see structurally, this is building out into something, and it is putting all of this weight focused on this one paragraph. The weight of the collapsed tomb is now in this paragraph. So the tremor of footfalls. So it's not just the sound, it's the physical sensation of those vibrations coming through the earth. So it is physical, it is tactile. And this is something, obviously I've remarked on before. I like it when descriptions are not just about sound or not just visual, that we include the other senses. So the tremor of footfalls. And of course, tremor here has the connotation of being afraid or being anxious, the idea of being shaky. It's not just the literal interpretation, tremor being this vibration, but tremor having that other emotive connotation, reaching down to that body where a rare enough occurrence. So we know there's a body interred, and these tremors are reaching down to it. This perception of the tremors is now suggesting that although this thing is dead, there's an awareness, because it's from kind of that perspective. We're getting the sense of how it's affecting that body, perhaps a handful of times over the past countless millennia. So the initial 100 years, we now see that this is a far more ancient barrow. And so the suggestion is there was a barrow created. Over time, it got covered in earth. Then a tree grew, and the tree grew to a huge size. And then the tree was destroyed. And that passage of time has now been spelled out, past countless millennia. That the long slumbering soul was stirred into wakefulness. And here we have that confirmation that, yes, this is a body, this is someone ostensibly dead, but it's now described as long slumbering, stirring into wakefulness, that the spirit is still inhabiting the physicality. And that, when we think about it, when we think about the idea of the roots being nets, about them snaking down, that this feels far more like something being contained and imprisoned rather than something being buried, stirred into wakefulness. So the idea of the undead, things rising, Then intense awareness. So not just awareness, intense awareness, a focalization, a singular focus, which an idea of consciousness, but also this idea of a being that has that laser beam focus that can come in. It's not just something's happening, something nebulous, something very specific, and that razor sharp awareness upon the sensation of not one set of feet, but a dozen. So the tremor of footfalls, we're now getting a sense of what's causing them, not one person, but a group of people, a dozen set of feet, ascending the steep, rough slopes and assembling at last around the shattered tree. So again, emphasizing destruction, emphasizing a group of people ringed round a tree. So now imagine that in your own mind. People lined up in a big circle around a tree. What does that suggest? That suggests ritual. Standing on top of a giant grave mound around a devastated tree and standing in this big circle, it suggests ritualism. The skein of wards embracing the creature was twisted and tangled, yet persistent in its multi-layered power. So we had the roots were a net and were snaking, and we had the bark lying in these twisted patterns, and now we have a skein of wards, so a magical net embracing the creature. And embracing is quite strange here because it's not about something being quite negative. Embracing is a really odd word choice here because it's almost a positive that these are wrapped around the creature. But when we think of a skein of words, we are thinking of a net, and it's then contrasted with twisted and tangled. So the twisted and tangled fit with the previous descriptions, but these idea of the words embracing. So we know there's a closeness between these words, this magical net that is wrapped around the creature, yet persistent in its multi-layered power. So this is complex. This is not a simple net, a highly complex net, and we have power mentioned, multi-layered power, complex, powerful. It has lasted for millennia. This is seeming more and more ominous, more portentous, more foreboding. The one who had imprisoned it had been thorough, fashioning rituals of determined performance, blood-traced and chaos-fed. They were intended to last forever. So now we get imprisonment being specifically mentioned. So it is a tomb that is imprisoning this body in powerful magic that was thorough, that was ritualistic, that had a permanence, and it was a determined permanence, blood-traced and chaos-fed, that it seems it's layer upon layer upon layer. So why would someone take so much time, so much effort to create such a complex prison for a burial tomb where they had buried this thing, this presence, this entity? And that is now suggesting this entity is incredibly powerful. This entity is potentially incredibly dangerous. And that sense of foreboding, that portentousness, that ominousness, that was fed in because of the snaking roots, because of these negative associations that we've seen detailed down here. But blood traced, again, emphasizing blood, chaos fed, emphasizing chaos. These are not positive, happy-go-lucky associations. These are portentous. They were intended to last forever. So again, emphasizing the passage of time. We've gone from 100 years to millennia to the idea of forever. That is a huge time scale being evoked, and it ties into the erosion, the passage of time, all of these things happening. Such intentions were a conceit, asserted in the flawed belief that mortals would one day be without malice or desperation. And so we have a criticism, an explicit criticism of the person that had tried to contain this creature. That the idea of trying to contain it forever was never going to happen. It was a lie that we tell ourselves, because it is a lie that is based on this flawed belief that someone would not come along at some point and undo it. And we have malice and desperation being the two reasons why someone would undo this trap, undo this net, unwork this power. Malice or desperation, upping the quotient of portentousness, of ominousness, that the future was a safer place than the brutal present, and that all that was once past would never again be revisited. So again, this is a lie based on, we think we are constantly going to evolve, that the future, we will always get better, that we will always be better, that we will always have progress. But as is one of the themes in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, the past is always with us. We can fall back into it. We can recreate the mistakes of the past, that humans and societies are flawed creations. And there's always going to be this conflict between moving forward and falling back. The 12 lean figures, bodies swathed in ragged, stained linen, their heads hooded and faces hidden behind grey veils, well understood the risks entailed when driven to precipitous acts. So we have confirmation, it is indeed 12. The perception of the footfalls was exact, it was dead on. Through the tremors, through the vibrations of footfalls, this entity was able to exactly identify that there were 24 feet, 12 pairs of feet. So that tells you something about the abilities of this long buried, long dead, imprisoned creature. The 12 lean figures, bodies swathed in ragged, stained linen. That is not exactly a positive description. And when we think of things like ragged, stained linen, we get into this conceit that we often have in narrative of judging a book by its cover, of decay or slovenliness being reflective of the character of the person. Susan Sontag did illness as metaphor, as a book exploring concepts of illness in this way. But quite often we relate physicality and physical representation to character, to internal aspects. So describing these bodies in ragged, stained linen is reflective potentially of their personality. And if we think of in earlier books, how Krupp's physicality causes people to underestimate him because he knows people judge him on how he appears, how he acts, and he uses that against them. And here we have bodies swathed in ragged, stained linen. So again, emphasizing decay, emphasizing decrepitude, emphasizing these negative aspects because it is ragged. Ties in with the erosion, ties in with the passage of time. Their heads hooded and faces hidden behind grey veils. Typically, when people meet in the middle of nowhere and they are hiding their faces, they are not generally there for a happy-go-lucky picnic. There is something ominous about that, hiding your face. This is an act happening in secret or some sort of secret rite. So hooded and hidden behind grey veils. So again, the idea of secrecy, things being disguised, things being hidden, things being contained. And that tangentially is obviously related to this hill that is over a burial mound, which is collapsed down to imprison a creature that is covered. Again, all these things are in conversation with one another. So these people well understood the risks entailed when driven to precipitous acts. So malice and desperation are the motivations that are implied, that are getting them to do this. That's their motivation here, that malice or desperation. And now it's kind of confirmed in that it's precipitous, that they are engaging something dangerous and they have been driven to this thing because they feel they have been forced to. Alas, they also understood desperation. So their desperation, so that echo, that deliberate repetition of one of the reasons, it's not malice, it's desperation. They are forced into a position where they are going to do something incredibly dangerous that can backfire precipitously. That is what they are weighing up. The risk is huge, but they are so desperate they're willing to take it. And that, my friends, does not bode well, does it? Again, it's ominous. It is worrying. It is building up this sense of tone. So because we've looked at, in the first couple of paragraphs, destruction, we've looked at erosion, the passage of time, and now the danger inherent in this, and they are going to do something really dangerous because they feel absolutely desperate that they have to. All were destined to speak at this gathering, the order specified by the corresponding position of various stars, planets, and constellations, all unseen behind blue sky, yet the locations known nonetheless. Now, this is interesting because we're a couple of different things at play here. So we have this sense that this is destined through astrology, that they are connected to the divine movement of planets and stars, that these vast powers that go through the cosmos is dictating this thing. So there's a sense of the universality of this, of mysterious cosmic motions dictating things. But all unseen behind blue sky. So this is not happening in the dead of night in the way that you would perhaps expect in a sort of cliched sort of rite of passage, that nighttime, let's all go out with our torches and our hoods and we're going to stand around this tree and have a strange supernatural rite. This is actually happening in the middle of the day. It's a blue sky and they can't see the planets or the stars. So that's wonderfully undercutting this whole image. It's subverting that trope of something that could have been very, very cliched and is now done in a slightly different way. And it's a nice thing that we can sometimes overlook. But they were destined to speak at this gathering. So there's, again, a sense of portentousness, a sense of inevitability, that when in the previous paragraph it had been such intentions were a conceit, this person was never going to be confined forever, because one day some idiot would come along and free them. And now we have, they were destined to speak. This thing was foretold to happen, not necessarily because of cosmology, but because people are idiots. Upon taking their positions, a long moment of stillness passed. Then the first of the nameless ones spoke. So we've built up to this moment. We can feel the tension rising. They have taken their positions. A ritual is about to begin. This ritual is ominous. This ritual is worrying. This ritual is dangerous. Something bad is going to happen. And all of this tension has been built up very slowly in 6 paragraphs. And that seems contradictory. 6 paragraphs to build up all of this tension. But can you see how there's this progression of everything? The movement from an initial close focused setting of this is the tree. The tree is on a mound. The mound is in a dell. People are walking up the mound. They have taken this position. There is something at the bottom. And now we're moving back and we're going to focus on what the people are doing. So there's this wonderful progression, this wonderful development, a very natural sort of tracking motion of everything going on to emphasize all of these different elements. And it's done so in a way to emphasize destruction and danger and magic and the ancient, everything tied in together. So that's why I just wanted to talk about those 6 paragraphs. I thought it was a really interesting way of introducing this section. And when we see it in that, we see themes of the passage of time, of ancient evils, of things that were destined or meant to last forever, suddenly coming back to haunt us in the present. Things that we didn't consider suddenly being relevant. We see people through desperate acts being forced into a position to do something they know is bad. all of these different things of connecting the past to the future, of desperate acts having terrible repercussions, of secret societies and magic being intertwined, and different motivating factors and conspiracies and motivations. And I think that is relevant when we approach reading the Bonehunters. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.